This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states. The Fall Line is a deep dive true crime podcast focused on cold cases that could be resolved if the public knew about them. You'll hear about missing people whose families have been searching for decades, John and Jane Doe cases from across the country in desperate need of public attention, unsolved serial homicides like the Atlanta Lovers Lane murders that never made the national news. The Fall Line digs deep, interviewing the families, law enforcement, and experts closest to the crimes to bring you cases you've never heard of and explore what can be done today to solve them. Find The Fall Line wherever you listen to podcasts. Hey, strangers. This tale does touch on some rather unfortunate ends for a few alligators. Nothing too grotesque, but listener discretion might be advised. I'm Laurah Norton, and this is One Strange Thing, the show where we search the nation's news archives for stories that can't quite be explained. Strangers, we must say, we're fond of a good urban legend. These stories are the folklore and fairy tales of our modern age. The bloody woman who appears after we chant her name, the deep-fried rats that are served up in buckets of fast food fried chicken, or spider bites that hide 1,000 pulsing eggs, just waiting to burst forth. Honestly, we'd give you more examples, but we kinda grossed ourselves out too much with that last one. Anyway, not all urban legends are based on nightmare scenarios. There are plenty that have floated around about, say, celebrities, like that 1990s-era belief that a child star from the TV show The Wonder Years grew up to be shock rock singer Marilyn Manson. But the best ones are, we think, scary and just outlandish enough to push the boundaries of belief. One of our very favorite urban legends, perhaps because it just butts up against that boundary, is the rumor that big old alligators are swimming around in the sewers of major American cities, feasting on rats and splashing around in the dank waters. The idea is that major metropolises everywhere might have a reptilian menace, roiling just underneath the surface. A nasty kind of secret, you might say. And the city with the biggest alligator legend of all? Well, it must be somewhere in Florida, right? Or maybe even Louisiana. According to official stats from the latter state, each is home to at least 1 million wild alligators. But no, it's New York City, a place that's become inexplicably synonymous with reptilian underground dwellers. Now, how would a northern city sewer system fill up with a reptile most at home in the South? As popular legend goes, vacationing New Yorkers, they were to blame. As the Seattle Times explains the myth, quote, "The story goes that New York vacationers buy these miniature pet alligators in Florida, pet dwarf alligators. Soon the people tire of their pet alligators and flush them down the toilet. Well, the alligators, nourished by heaven knows what nutrients in the sewers, they multiply and grow up and become dangerous." And that story, it's become so pervasive that there's even an unofficial holiday dedicated to sewer gators. It's February 9th if you'd care to celebrate. In fact, according to CNN, New York City has dedicated a statue to the concept. In 2023, there was a bronze sculpture of a, quote, life-size gator wrapped around a New York City manhole cover placed in Union Square Park. The idea of reptiles swirling around in the sewers, it's not just frightening, it's also kind of, well, fun. After all, according to the Daily News, the 1980s phenomenon of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was, at least in some way, inspired by New York sewer gators. Now, there was more radioactive goo involved in that situation, and ninjutsu, But there was also a rat, which we believe should count for something. Anyway, according to CNN, it's illegal to own an alligator in New York. Not that anyone claims direct ownership of alligators that might be sloshing around in the pipes, of course. But it does lend a certain dramatic, urban legendy credence to the idea that a city dweller could be encouraged to dispose of an erstwhile pet if it got too big to hide. Inconvenient reptile? Better get it down to the sewer. Would you actually be able to flush a gator down a toilet? We're not so sure about that particular aspect of the story, as it both seems impractical and cruel, but purloined gators, they've certainly been smuggled into the city. In the old days, before the law, one could even mail order them, and even now, they are certainly brought back from other states, like little sharp-toothed contraband. In fact, according to a 2020 New York Times article, quote, "The city rescues several alligators a year, typically former pets that have been abandoned after having outgrown their cute phase." As a side note, most are rescued after being released in the city's parks, which is a terrifying prospect. But what about the sewers? Well, that is a more difficult question, and it's not exclusive to New York City. We'll get back to the urban legend in a bit, but first, we need to dig into the history. Stories about alligators in the sewer system, they date back at least 150 years. There are stories from Atlanta and Dallas, Detroit, Newark, Dayton, the list goes on. The news items range from one-liners about alligators discovered in Ohio and Texas sewers to an absolutely bizarre story from the Atlanta Constitution involving the Civil War, reptile branding, and an escaped pet that wasn't recovered until the Reconstruction era. Or so they say. That's the thing with reporting in the late 19th and early 20th century. Yellow journalism was in full force by then, and an early kind of news virality had reporters kicking up all kinds of salacious and often totally fabricated news. And we mean that in the create a cryptid, Weekly World News, Bat Boy, Elvis sighted at local Denny's kind of way. So there was a lot of newsprint excitement over alligators in sewers between 1870 and 1915, with relatively few facts to back any of it up. Some of the stories seem designed to frighten the locals. Others seem concocted to take up space on slow news days. But some stories, they did seem more believable than others. Belief being a, well, relative term. We'll get into it. This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states. Strangers, we know you love mysteries. That's why you're listening right now. And if you want to keep the fun going every day, join us in playing our favorite game, June's Journey. You play as June Parker, an amateur detective on a quest to solve the murder of her sister and uncover her family's many secrets. You'll need to find objects devilishly hidden in intricate scenes full of little details before the timer runs out. It's set in the roaring 20s, and the art and plotting are amazing. There are so many elements to this game, you uncover new secrets as you chase mysteries that take you from New York parlors to the streets of Paris. Personally, I cannot get enough of June's Journey. It's the perfect relaxation, entertaining and engaging to my mind, but also a great break from the kind of mysteries I look at for work. That is, the work of entertaining you. In June's Journey, there is always a new element to the case waiting to be cracked. And that is just the beginning. You can unleash your creativity by designing your luxurious island estate to your own tastes. You can let your imagination be your guide. And you can join a detective club to chat and play with others, or compete in the detective league to test your skills against fellow sleuths. You can even see who can manage the fastest case solve or the highest score. Plus, there's also great seasonal content with shifting challenges, beautiful themed landscapes, and exclusive rewards that you can enjoy year-round. How sharp are your observation skills? Put them to the test in June's Journey. Download for free today on iOS and Android. Now, about those stories. Back in 1915, there was a bit of a stir about an alleged business venture based in Florida. Apparently, a picture was presented of this whole affair, but it was not printed in the local papers. According to a New York Sun article that then ran in many other publications, Captain B.R. King, the superintendent of the Fort Meade, Florida waterworks, quote, showed a picture of the only working gator in the state. To whom he showed this picture, we are not exactly sure. Was there a press conference? Who can say? Anyway, this alligator was employed as the captain's very own solution to a problem that his city was facing. Per the Boston Globe, quote, some time ago, one of the sewers of Fort Meade became clogged up. It was 400 feet from manhole to manhole, and the sewer was 20 feet below the surface and in quicksand. So, Captain King decided that the best way to deal with this clog was not to send down crews of his men to dislodge it. Rather, it seemed best to capture a gator, tie a rope around it, and apparently send it on its way, hoping, we guess, that it would just dislodge the clog for him. The idea, apparently, was that it wouldn't be able to turn around and would thus have no choice but to fight its way through all that muck. So, first, they tried an 18-inch reptile, but that was apparently too small, and it just moseyed on back without clearing the clog. So, next, they sent down a 4-foot one, and according to the Globe at least, quote, he worked his way from manhole to manhole, carrying the line with him, after which the cleaning of the sewer was a simple matter. This was, well, it was inventive, we will give the captain that, setting aside for the moment any questions of how healthy sewage cleaning might be for alligators. But then we discovered, and this is strange, it seemed like someone out there had already had the very same idea. Or so another article claimed. It was also from 1915, but dated months earlier, March versus September. And by the way it was written, it seemed like this particular operation had their sewer gator cleaning concept up and going for at least some time, and a county in New York, Erie, was considering making a purchase. According to that March 1915 Evening Observer article, quote, a New York company has agents in Florida who select sewer-sized gators and ship them to cities which order. Apparently, the Erie County superintendent, he was considering this option for some reason. He told the Erie Dispatch that he, quote, wasn't certain yesterday which of the street department force he'd employ to handle the alligator if he gets one, but he did agree that the idea is a practical one. Now, he figured that when the alligator got too old for sewer cleaning, it could just retire to the zoo. Strangers. Assuming that any of this was actually true, we feel that it was, at best, very poor planning. If we put aside the obvious options that journalists simply made up these stories, or that the New York company was scamming everyone with their alligator business, and that one might really order a sewer cleaning gator, that unfortunate working reptile, it would not last long in New York State. Per the New York Times, the water temperature is simply too cold in New York sewer systems for alligators to survive very long. They've seen proof of that from the poor reptiles that have been dumped in local ponds and have been pulled out with obvious signs of cold shock. And eating and swimming in sewage or consuming rats, that isn't good for them either, which leads us to believe this business venture wouldn't have taken off anywhere, even in Florida. Now, maybe a gator was used to clean out a single clogged drain, but on a large scale, not a great business plan. And that brings us back to New York City. It's true that the environment there is just not conducive to alligators, especially a passel of them who would somehow manage to live and breed and grow there. In fact, according to Skeptic magazine, quote, historian Mark Barber notes that claims of alligators breeding in the sewers of New York are physically impossible, as the sex of the offspring is determined by the temperature of the nest. Male alligators require a temperature of over 93 degrees Fahrenheit. Since the temperature in the sewers is well below this, there would be no male alligators born to reproduce. So that pretty much puts a stop to the idea of gators that grow huge in the perfect, swampy, sewagey environment, right? Because those New York sewers, they're providing anything but. That said, those rumors, they had to start somewhere, didn't they? Now, while those stories popped up in the city, just like they did everywhere in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it seems they truly popped off in NYC somewhere around the 1930s. And according to the Times, there was a rather famous sewer official named Teddy May who can be thanked for at least part of that. He claimed in a 1959 book that back in the early 30s, he'd at first ignored reports from his men that they'd seen gators in the sewers. But after consistent complaints, he'd eventually gone down to investigate for himself. He said he'd come back up chastened and frightened because he'd found an infestation. He said that the alligators, they'd made a home for themselves down there. Per the Daily News, quote, avoiding the swift current of the trunk lines under major avenues, the beast had wormed up smaller pipes under less important avenues, and there, Teddy had found them. The colony appeared to have settled contentedly under the very streets of the busiest city in the world. Spooky, right? But based on what we know about New York City sewers and water temperature, unlikely. There could have been a pet gator or two that had been released, but it would have been sluggish and unhappy, and if we're being realistic, likely dead. Certainly, the reptiles would not have lasted long enough to establish any colonies. But Teddy May told his story often enough that it spread, and by the time he recounted it to an author, well, you know how that goes. The legend is cemented. We said, though, that Teddy was only partially responsible for the 1930s boom in sewer gator interest. The other major event was a story that swept the nation, at least for a week or two, back in February of 1935. When discussing it, most people refer to original coverage in the New York Times, offered by a reporter who arrived rather late on the scene and had to summarize events after they'd already occurred. We cannot say that he skimped on the details, though. He wrote up his tale like he was auditioning for Hollywood. The story concerned some young men, mostly the sons of Italian immigrants, who were said to have stumbled upon an alligator while shoveling snow in the streets of East Harlem. It all began with a 16-year-old named Salvatore. The papers have him down as Salvatore Concaluce, but we found birth records that list the likely actual name of Salvatore Condalusi, so we'll stick with Salvatore, or Sal. Anyway, Sal and his neighborhood friends were tasked with shoveling snow into what the New York Times describes as a, quote, gaping manhole to clear sidewalks, we assume, when Sal caught sight of some movement down below. Here's the extremely dramatic recap from that 1935 Times article. Quote, what he saw in the thickening dusk almost caused him to topple into that icy cavern, for the jagged surface of the ice blockade below was moving, and something black was breaking through. Sal's eyes widened. Then he managed to leap to his feet and call to his friends, "Honest, it's an alligator." Naturally, his friends did not believe him. We consider that to be fair, and came over to investigate. They were surprised to find that Sal was actually correct in his assessment. It was, honestly, an alligator. They decided they needed to get it out of the sewer, since that was certainly not where an alligator should be, and thus they went to a local stove repair store to borrow a length of rope. We are afraid that this is the point where the story, well, gets stretched thin in terms of credulity, if you weren't already there, because the reporter claims that Sal, who was apparently a rather big fan of Westerns, was able to successfully lasso the alligator. Then, though, he was at a bit of a loss because he couldn't muster up the strength to actually haul it from the depths of the manhole. So then, according to the Times, his friends jumped in to aid the effort, and they, somehow, managed to drag the poor gator out onto the pavement. It was, not looking good. Per the Times, it, quote, lay non-committal and seemed sick, which apparently evoked some pity from the boys. That is, until the gator, quote, opened its jaws and snapped at them. So their rescue plans abruptly changed, and then they killed it. Sorry, but we did warn you. Then, the Times claimed, the boys both, quote, triumphantly and sorrowfully, don't ask us to explain that combination of teenage emotions, quote, took their victim to the Lehigh Stove and Repair Shop. There the boys went inside with their deceased sewer gator, and we guess the store also had a convenient scale because, quote, there they found it to weigh 125 pounds. They said it measured 7.5 or 8 feet. It became at once the greatest attraction the store had ever had. The whole neighborhood milled about, and finally, a call for the police reached a nearby station. When the New York Times reporter finally arrived, hours after events occurred, the following was relayed to him. Quote, at about 9 p.m., when tired mothers had succeeded in getting most of the alligator-conscious youngsters to bed, a Department of Sanitation truck rumbled up to the store and made off with the prize. Its destination was Barren Island and an incinerator. According to a 2020 Times retrospective, the speculation at the time was that the gator was not homegrown. Rather, people thought it had perhaps, quote, escaped from a passing steamer in the East River and had swum into a sewer outflow pipe. That would account for it being so sluggish and unhappy, we suppose. But, as the excellent website sewergator.com notes, this whole story is now viewed with a big pinch of cynical salt. The website administrator explains that, quote, even though this story is from a reputable newspaper, it deserves to be treated with some skepticism. It's evident the reporter didn't witness any of the events himself, nor is it clear who told him about the incident. The whole story could have well been a hoax by the 3 young men. It also seems peculiar that the dead alligator would have been so quickly disposed of, incinerated no less, before the reporter was summoned. Another complaint we've seen, over and over, is that no pictures were taken. And, admittedly, all that is pretty suspicious. Very familiar, actually, if you've listened to the dozens of cryptid stories that we've brought you over the last 4 years. The first thing that you should look for in any unbelievable tale is evidence, right? Now, of course, the boys actually existed. We found proof of them in New York City records. But the gator? Most websites and sources now assume that it was a prank versus yellow journalism or something made up by the reporter. Just a bunch of boys having fun and telling a story to that credulous newsman. And you know what, strangers? We probably would assume that too. Except for one strange thing. There actually is proof, and there was a photo taken. We found it in the Daily News, published in February of 1935. Seems like at least one reporter did make it in time. In the photo, Sal posed with another young man right in front of the stove repair shop. And right between them, yep, an alligator. A pretty big one. And we're sorry to say, a very not alive one. The headline claims that it was 8 feet long. We cannot verify that, but it certainly is there, And we can't imagine they had a lot of fake alligators available to working-class teenagers in East Harlem during the Depression who felt like playing a little prank. So, based on this evidence, we'd say there likely was at least one alligator in the New York City sewers. It wasn't flushed down in a toilet, and if it was an escaped pet, it was a very large and very unhappy one. Now, was this unlucky 1930s reptile a sign of a sewer system swarming with gators? No. But we think that the city is certainly deserving of its statue and of its holiday. Although maybe less lassoing would be nice, should any local adolescents run across another wild reptile lurking underneath an open manhole. We have read that local authorities prefer to take them to the zoo. So, kids, do keep that in mind, won't you? We hope you'll join us next time for another real-life story from the fine print of America's local papers, from the lives of regular people, just like you and me, except for one strange thing. Strangers, we've launched a Substack to tell more stories of the weird that aren't quite long enough for the podcast. Some posts are paid, some are free, but you'll need to be a subscriber to get them delivered right to your inbox. So, follow the link in our show notes to sign up for a lot more content. It's like a newsletter, but more fun. One Strange Thing is an independent podcast. To support the show and to hear more of the entirely true and enticingly peculiar, you now have 3 options to enjoy 2 extra bonus episodes a month. On Apple Premium, you can get 2 bonus episodes delivered to your app of choice for just $2.99. And for $2 more a month on Patreon, you'll get more fun extras. There you'll find ad-free early releases of our regular episodes, 2 full-length bonus episodes, monthly giveaways, and occasional blog posts, all for $5 a month. We hope you'll check out one of these options to support the show. There's a link in our show notes. And if you enjoy One Strange Thing, please take a moment to leave us a great rating or review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps. This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.